Hello everyone, welcome back to another video where today I'm going to be taking a look at the overnight figure for Doctor Who Season 2, Episode 2, Lux. And I have to admit, the number is low. That is the sort of tagline of this. The number is low. I'm going to be going over all the information and giving you all of it, and we're going to be talking about this viewing figure. But subscribe if you're new, that would be greatly appreciated. We cover regular Doctor Who content here on the channel. We're almost at 26,000 and any support would be appreciated. But let's get right into it. Ratings. Doctor Who dips lower against stronger ITV competition on a night which was an all-round low for BBC One. I'm taking this from TV Zone. Doctor Who continued on BBC One on Saturday 19th of April with Lux, which scored overnight audience of 1.58 million. The consolidated figure, which will include iPlayer devices and catch-up, will be released on 28th of April. So again, it's worth noting that none of this includes iPlayer devices or catch-up, and it's also worth noting that, like I've said every week, Doctor Who releases about 12 hours prior to its actual broadcast on BBC One on iPlayer. So that is inevitably going to take a couple 100,000 off of the viewing figure, because all the diehards, i.e. me, are watching it as soon as it comes out. Even in spite of that though, this is a drop from last week, and I'm not going to deny that that is the case. It was BBC One's fourth most watched programme of the day, behind The News, Casualty and Blankety Blank, with the latter ahead of it by a whisker. In the absence of Gladiators, Doctor Who inherited a third of the audience compared to last week's lead-in, which set the tone for BBC One having an underwhelming night all round. So that's another thing, like, it looks like the BBC struggled most of the night anyway. Overall, it was the 8th most watched title of the day across all channels, with ITV winning the day with Britain's Got Talent, Doctor Who's direct competition with nearly 2.5 times the audience, and the 1% Club with 99 to beat, and an evening with Elton John on ITV also just ahead of Doctor Who overall. So yeah, it's not a great result, and again, I do want to stress that this is just the overnight figure, and we don't have the consolidated figures for Robot Revolution yet, which I'll be interested to see. And another thing worth noting is, as they say, it was scheduled directly opposite Britain's Got Talent. And I can only speak sort of anecdotally to this, but I remember during the Matt Smith era, Doctor Who always kind of did worse compared to Britain's Got Talent. I was in a family where only I was really interested in Doctor Who, so on Saturday nights when it came down to it, Britain's Got Talent was always on, even though I wanted Doctor Who on. Because it's just broadly a more widely appealing concept. Doctor Who has always been a slightly more out there idea. Again, that's not to say that this figure is fantastic, just that Britain's Got Talent and other talent shows have always largely outperformed it, particularly on overnights. And it's also worth noting that even they aren't getting the numbers that they did. Britain's Got Talent's overnight figure was under 4 million compared to where it was last week, which was just over 4 million, I think. The thing I hope is that with this episode being broadly received as very, very good, it has decent catch-up numbers. I think that is definitely a possibility. Just adding this in post because I'd only just seen it. According to Ratings UK, remember these figures do not include transmission or catch-up data on a night dominated by ITV. BBC One's highest audience was just 2.1 million. Does Saturday night belong to ITV? So yeah, that puts it into a bit more context. The highest viewing figure on all of the BBC that day was 2.1, which is not that far off of the 2 million that Doctor Who got last week. So it looks like the BBC all round struggled, which is interesting. Not just Doctor Who. Again, I still don't think that the Doctor Who figure is great, but it is interesting to see that it looks like the corporation in general did not have a great night compared to ITV. It is also worth noting that it's still in the top 10 on Saturday. So, you know, it's not like in the 80s where it was like 23rd or something like that. However, talking of the 80s, I do think there's an interesting parallel in that I think that this era will probably go down as the Sylvester McCoy equivalent of New Who. In that it's broadly seen as an improvement by most people who watch it, but it's largely seen as too late, and public interest, unfortunately, continues to dwindle, especially up against much more hardcore competition. Obviously, it was pitted directly against Corrie, and the soaps were a much bigger deal then than they are now. They were like the juggernauts of TV. And then this time around, you know, it was scheduled right opposite Britain's Got Talent, and had been released 12 hours prior to its most hardcore following. So yeah, admittedly, not a great result, which is a shame, because I think the episode is really, really good, but it's important to note that really what matters is the consolidated figures, and the overnights are less and less relevant, particularly with Doctor Who being released 12 hours beforehand, which is not the case for any of these other shows, I'm pretty sure. If Disney do pull out and we still get Doctor Who on the BBC, I hope they drop this 8 AM launch thing. I really don't think it does the show any favours. I think it segregates the audience into separate time zones, and I think ultimately it's better just to have one release date on the same time. I mean, Christmas proves this. Christmas, obviously the figure there is helped by the fact that it's Christmas, so there's more people on TV anyway. But if you just look at the overnight figures for Christmas episodes, they're better because the audience isn't segregated between two different times. Same goes for the 60th as well. Part of me also wonders if Doctor Who just generally works better later in the year compared to earlier, because like I say, the last two big times it's successful have been the Christmas specials and the 60th specials, both of which are in the winter. So yeah, a lot to sort of dig into there. Overall, I still think it's important to wait for the 7-day figures. I'm hoping soon we'll have the 7-day figures for Robot Revolution, which will give us a sense of how the show actually performed more broadly compared to just live TV viewing, which is, as I said, dying anyway. Literally nothing is getting the figures that it used to. But at the same time, I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say that like this figure is fantastic, even despite what I think is a pretty damn good episode of Doctor Who. And hopefully the fact that it is seen as good helps the general maybe viewing figure go up a little bit. It's also worth noting, of course, that this does not include Disney anyway or any of the international viewing. This just includes UK live BBC One. So what we're really looking to see is how it's performing on Disney Plus with regards to future plans for the show and whether Disney renews the deal. So for that side of things, this figure isn't necessarily what the best indicator is. Obviously, it's hard to really know what it's actually doing on Disney Plus because Disney are a lot more secretive than UK broadcasters are when it comes to their viewing figures. I think if anything though, this is the strongest indication in a while that viewing figures do not necessarily correlate with quality. I mean, I even said as much with my Sylvester McCoy comparison. People who know me know that Sylvester McCoy's era is my favourite Classic Who era and is generally seen to have some of the best episodes of Classic Who with hindsight. But that didn't stop it being, you know, pretty much absolutely trounced in the ratings. Although admittedly, I do think there's a difference here in that I think in some ways the 80s was deliberate sabotage, whereas this time around it's just the result of slow declining interest sort of since the Matt Smith era, really. And also partially just knock-on effects of streaming and general TV decline as well. I think the key difference between now and the 80s is that whereas in the 80s the BBC was trying to get it cancelled, now I think the BBC actively want it to stick around for the merchandise sales and the revenue from licensing, if nothing else. It's still a relative moneymaker in that regard. The only other thing that really comes close is Bluey, and even that is co-owned by multiple companies. So I think even if the viewing figures aren't fantastic, they will still keep it around in the short term. Whether that takes the form of things like, you know, one-off specials or something like that remains to be seen going forwards, assuming the Disney deal doesn't continue in its present form. But I don't ever think that it'll fully go away for like 12 years in the same way that it did in the 90s. I think it just makes them too much money. Also, there's a plane going over me. I'll be interested to see how the next couple of weeks fare. I believe The Well airs the same day as a football match, so that one might get pushed because of extra time, although I'm not too sure on that. I know that's the same for the Eurovision episode as well. Hopefully that's not the case, and it does get to air between Eurovision and the football, because I do think that will give it a boost. But we'll just have to wait and see. The consolidated are really the figures that are most important. But that's all I'm going to say. Let me know what you guys think. If you did enjoy this video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you later.